Good evening, everyone. This is Aletha from Inner Star Compass Healing coming to you live with Dr. Larry Farwell. And I am, it's just an honor to have him here. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Larry Farwell. Hi, Larry. How are you?
Hello, Aletha. Great to see you. I'm doing great and delighted to be here.
Why, wow. I am delighted. It's just an honor to be in the room with the same, with folks that are thinking about the same things that we're trying to bring conscious mindsets, awareness to the world. And without further ado, Larry, can you tell us a little bit about yourself on top of the bio that we've already introduced?
Sure. Well, I'm a neuroscientist. I study the human brain. I've also done work in quantum physics and the relationship between consciousness and the human brain in collaboration with my father, Professor George Farwell, who's a physicist. And I've invented a number of things. I invented the first brain-computer interface to allow a person to use brain waves to interact with a computer and a speech synthesizer so people can actually talk who are completely paralyzed, just simply using their brainwaves. Now there are probably 1,000 labs around the world that are doing that, but at the time when I invented it, it was the first one. What is perhaps of most interest to some of the folks here today is the science of creating miracles, the research I've done on that. And I've written a book called The Science of Creating Miracles, Neuroscience, Quantum Physics, and Living the Life of Your Dreams. And what it's really about is using science, using a scientific understanding of how the brain works and how human consciousness works to create miracles in your life, to create the life of your dreams, as the title of the book says.
Yeah.
And we've conducted research in the laboratory, which we can go into in a little more detail later if you'd like. But we've conducted laboratory research that shows that there is a scientific definition for what a miracle is, and that miracles are actually real and we can produce them. So that's what it's about.
You mentioned the word scientific, and to our audience who are not in the scholarly field, we like to say that science, it seems to be, with science, you have facts, you have a theory, then you prove it through research, and then becomes fact. And while science is not the do all say all, it does give people more of a believability towards concept, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I am so happy to hear that we have some scientific evidence now showing stuff that people have done years, hundreds of years doing it intuitively. The shamans and the Native Americans doing things, applying concepts that we now know scientifically does work. And so I wanted to talk some more about your experience when you were a 12-year-old and the Christmas tree and the candlelights. Can you tell us a little bit about that? You mentioned that in the book.
Well, yes. There is a famous experiment in physics called the double slit experiment. And it gives us a vision of how the observer influences the observed, how when you look at elementary particles in one way, they appear as particles. You look at them another way, they appear as waves. And we were looking, I was 12 years old. We were in Denmark for a year with my dad, who was studying at that time with Niels Bohr, who was one of the great physicists of the last century. And we had a Christmas tree with candles on it, which is common over there in Denmark, or was at the time. And my mother had a scarf, got a silk scarf for Christmas. So I took the silk scarf and I looked at the tree through the scarf. And instead of little individual spots for the candles, it came out as a pattern of a multifaceted pattern. And what that illustrates what they do in physics experiments when they show that particles of light, photons, will act like waves when you put them through slits, a double slit, or in this case, multiple slits.
Hmm.
So I was all excited about that because it was something visually interesting. And my dad was all excited because this illustrates one of the fundamental principles of physics, that if you observe things consciously in a different way, you get different results. Now, we went farther than that in what we call the conscious unified field experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of that was to see if all of the wise people throughout the ages have been right when they've said a couple of things. One is, if you look at what the most popular book that came out last week on how to be successful, or you look at the scriptures from 1,000, 2,000, or 5,000 years ago, they'll all be saying you have this inner vision, this inner vibration on the level of your consciousness, and that enlivens nature in that, and then that shows up in your life.
Mm-hmm.
They'll all say that that inner field of pure consciousness that we contact within ourselves, the essential constituent of human life, is the same as a unified field that the particle wave phenomena that make up quantum mechanics spring from. And of course, thousands of years ago, they didn't talk about it in terms of quantum mechanics. They talked about it in more metaphorical ways, but they're all saying the same thing. So we decided we would check that out, test that out in the laboratory. And in order to do that in the laboratory, we had to have some kind of a measurable result.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that we could objectively measure. Now, I think most of the people who are listening to us today, including you and me, have had experiences sort of like this. You think, gee, I'd really like to hear from Joe, and the phone rings, and it's Joe just then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we created that vibration on the level of our consciousness. Maybe we somehow manifested that, but who knows? Maybe not, because you don't know the probability. So
Mm-hmm.
that experience people have often enough, they think, oh, this is for real. I really can influence the world using my awareness, but they don't have a scientific proof of it. So we decided that we would put all of this to the test. And we set up an experiment where we don't know the probability Joe is going to call, but we do know exactly the probability distribution of alpha particle emission by plutonium, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the major ingredients of an atomic bomb. And so we decided to set up an experiment where we would see if we could influence that quantum mechanical event using consciousness alone, without any physical intervention. And to cut to the chase, Aletha, we discovered that we could, and other people, especially people of highly developed consciousness, we could create a huge, extremely statistically significant shift in the probability of quantum mechanical events.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is that useful? Well, you probably don't want to go out next week and influence the probability distribution of alpha particle emission by plutonium. However, the whole universe is nothing but quantum mechanical events. That's all
Exactly.
there is there. And it all functions according to the laws of probability. So if we can shift that probability distribution, we can have an impact on the world. And that we can create our lives. I think that's not only how we drive our brains as neuroscientists, that's how we create our lives. And all the wise people for thousands of years have always said, well, yeah, you create your life on the level of your consciousness, and then it shows up in the environment. Well, we showed that actually happens.
That's why I am so excited, Larry, because you guys show that it happens. And here we are, especially folks in the yogic world or meditation world, are saying, think about it, create an image of what it is, and live as it already exists.
Yeah.
But you're now telling us that when we do that, we are changing the probability of it occurring by just focusing on it alone.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where miracles come from. I was having a conversation with my dad. We were sitting in a restaurant, and I said, hey, Dad, anything is possible. And he said, well, yes, any imaginable configuration of quantum particle wave phenomena is possible. Some are highly probable, some are highly improbable, some are extremely improbable.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be thought that a miracle was something that went outside the laws of science. Well, in quantum mechanics, anything's possible. So a miracle is simply something that's highly improbable. So I said to
Mhm.
my dad, okay, anything's possible. He said, yeah. And I said, well, all right, so it's possible that the elementary particles that make up my body and your body, plus enough air to breathe, are going to tunnel from here to the other side of the moon right now. And we're
Mhm.
going to carry on this conversation on the other side of the moon. And tunneling is a known phenomenon in quantum mechanics. It really does happen. They've measured it in the laboratory.
Mhm.
And he said, well, yeah, you're right. That could happen. There's a probability that would happen. And he got out a piece of paper, a paper napkin, actually, and he wrote down a formula. I've still got the formula. He wrote down a formula and he computed the approximate probability that that event was going to happen. It was
Wow.
a really, really low probability. It didn't happen. But the point is that even that could have happened. Now,
Right.
how do we create that? We create that resonance on the level of our consciousness because the conscious unified field that is our essential constituent is the same as a conscious unified field that particle wave phenomena arise from, that the whole universe arises from. So yes, that thing that you've experienced and that all the people who are really interested in developing their life and developing their consciousness have experienced in their life, well, we showed in the laboratory that that actually is real. Miracles are real and you can create them.
That's just beautiful. Larry, let's go back to the candle though, because
Okay?
in your definition of the unified field, you also say we see what we see based on limited perception, right? So
Right.
I think I hope I'm on the right track with the candle and this what I just presented. So based on our limited perception, that is why sometimes we're not able to connect to that field and create the miracles that we want.
Yes, yes, that's the case. And the thing is that, well, let me geek out for just a minute here on the nature of the physical world, because it's not what you'd think from common sense. This desk here in front of me, you can hear me knocking on it. To me, it looks solid and brown
Yeah.
and very different from the air around it. Now, the reason it looks brown is because of the way my nervous system functions. We pick up with our eyes a very narrow slice of the spectrum of electromagnetic waves. We
Hmm.
don't, for example, see X-rays. We don't see ultraviolet. We don't see infrared. We feel that as infrared as heat. And so something in this particular spectrum looks brown to me, but that has to do with my nervous system.
Hmm.
In the movie, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie
Oh
Predator,
yeah.
where the bad guy in that movie was this predator, the space alien, and he, instead of perceiving in the range we perceive, he perceived in the range of infrared. So
Right.
what we experience as heat, he would actually see, and that there actually could be beings out that are there that are like that. So Arnold was covered with cold mud, and he'd just been in the cold water.
Hmm.
He was the same temperatures as stuff behind him, and the guy couldn't see him. And he zapped the alien predator zapped a rat who was warm, and he could see the rat because he was warm, and that's
Right.
infrared light that he could see, infrared radiation. So it's perfectly possible that some other being would look at this desk and see something very different. So in that sense, our perception is limited. But let's look at the structure of what's actually there. It looks very solid, but if we go inside it, we see it's mostly empty space, and there are molecules moving around very fast. And within those molecules, we'll see atoms. We look deep within those, we'll see protons, neutrons, electrons. We look within those, we'll see quarks. We get down to the string theory level, and you'll simply find vibrating strings. So if you look really carefully at what this desk really is, it's a pattern of vibrating strings. It's a pattern of vibration in the conscious unified field. And
Hmm.
everything else that looks so solid and immutable, as if it's so different and separate from ourselves.
Hmm.
It's just patterns in the conscious unified field. And so when what happens, the way we create our lives is on that level of our inner vision, on the level of a quiet level of the mind, on the intuitive level, we create a resonant frequency. Like
Hmm.
you pluck a guitar string, and I love to sing and play guitar. So you pluck a
Yeah.
guitar string, and it resonates at a resonant frequency. If there are other instruments in the environment with a similar resonant frequency, they'll pick that up and they'll start vibrating too. So
Mm.
what happens is we create a resonant frequency on the level of our consciousness. It enlivens the conscious unified field in that same resonance, and then that shows up in our lives. So
Mm.
that's how you create your lives, and that's why what we envision becomes reality. It has a physical basis in the physical universe, because the
Right.
physical universe is like waves on an ocean, particle wave phenomena arising in the conscious unified field, and you are that conscious unified field, so you can create that. The
Mm.
universe is much more malleable than we used to think it was, and
I
that's
am so
how all of
happy to
those
hear
things
that.
are like. Go ahead and say again.
I'm so happy to hear that. When I was reading that part in your book that talked about the desk and other solid objects, my mindset couldn't wrap around it because I had this paradigm thinking that material is material, material is dead.
Yeah.
So when I started reading your book and you're showing scientific proof that yeah, there is movement going on in this material and it still vibrates at a certain level.
Yeah.
What happened to humans to the point where we cannot even feel the vibration? I guess it could be because everybody's at a different their nervous system through life has experienced things differently, and therefore they're in tune at a different level of consciousness.
Well, yes, and the thing is that the the way things look on the surface is different from the way they look at the depth. Our
Mhm,
our our eyes, our ears, our senses are finite in the way that they're able to perceive things, and so things look a particular way to us, and that allows us to navigate around in the world. It allows us to get things done. We see them in a simpler way than they really are. But
mhm,
if you look deeply into things, it turns out that everything is all just vibrations in that same field. You and me, all of our subjective experiences come from that inner field of pure intelligence, that inner field of pure consciousness. All of the thoughts and emotions, and sensations we have are just waves in that level of consciousness. So it looks like life is a series of events and the universe is a collection of things, but actually, life is a series of experiences, and the universe is an experience. And some other nervous system would be experiencing it completely differently. And
mhm,
in quantum physics, you look at something in a different way, and it appears differently, like particles versus waves, like
mhm,
one single candle. But if I look at it through a scarf, it's a whole bunch of candles spread out all over. Well, uh, that's because when you look in a particular way with multiple slits, double slits or multiple slits, uh, the particles act like waves, or the light acts like waves. You look in a different way and it acts like particles. So we're in a very real sense creating what we experience in the world, and that's why we can transmute our lives into something more fulfilling.
That's just beautiful. I want to go back to some of your other publications where you
Okay.
mentioned and talked about brain mapping. That you and your team have been very famous for the work that you do in brain mapping. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I guess to the extent that you can publicly say.
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about that. All right. Well, let me again geek out for a minute on the science, and I'll do this only to a limited degree. Uh, your neurons fire electrically, or actually electrochemically. Neurons communicate with each other, and that results in patterns when the brain is engaging in a particular information processing process. You get particular patterns that come up in the brainwaves. Brainwaves simply means electrical activity measured from outside the head. I mean, you plug something into the wall, you'll have 60 cycles per second of alternating current coming through the wall, but that'll be say a few volts, or actually it'll be a few hundred volts maybe,
Hmm.
max. Whereas with the brain, what we pick up on the outside of the head is a few microvolts, a few millionths of a volt. But they're very complex patterns. Now, you don't get a shock when you touch somebody's head because a millionth of a volt is not going to affect you, but they're going on. So when we put sensors on the head, we can pick up those patterns in the brain waves. Now, when the brain does particular things, particular processing, information processing activities, you get patterns in those brain waves. And one of those patterns is, of course, called a memory encoding related multifaceted electroencephalographic response. I can't even say it straight myself.
I was so glad that you said it instead of me.
Acronym MERMER, MER. So this is called a murmur, or a P300 murmur. And that is a particular brain response when you have an aha experience. So something new happens, something interesting happens, you get this aha experience. And I'll talk more about that in terms of how you can improve the function of your brain later. But let's talk about it in terms of brain fingerprinting. Let's say that you have somebody, well, I'll give you an example from your life. We did an experiment at the FBI where we presented briefly on a computer screen information that only an FBI agent would recognize due to their unique training, mixed in with other things. So if somebody wasn't an FBI agent, no big deal. They'd see a bunch of stuff flashing on the screen. If somebody was an FBI agent, they would say, aha, they would see, oh, that's a technique that we use. That's something that I learned in my FBI agent training. So at that point, their brain would say, aha. Well, we pick up that aha pattern and we can say, okay, that guy's an FBI agent. So, or because he knows things only an FBI agent would know. So similarly, somebody who's committed a murder, he knows details about that murder that no one else knows except the investigators and the perpetrator. If somebody is a terrorist mastermind, and this is something I've worked on, I've done a lot of work in recent years on it, all that's classified, so I can't go into details. But for example, the mastermind behind a terrorist mass shooting, a terrorist bombing, a terrorist hijacking, they know all the details about it. Now, they're not going to go there and get themselves caught or killed committing the act, but they have it stored in their brain.
Right.
So when we have a suspect, we find out all kinds of information about these terrorist activities. We intercept coded messages, and we know what they're communicating. We know all kinds of inside information about the details that are not released to the public. Right. So if somebody was a mastermind behind that, or one of the handlers behind it, we can test them and we can see, oh, they have the record of that crime stored in their brain, and we can catch the higher level bad guys. And we've used this to catch serial killers. We used it to help. There was a guy named Terry Harrington who had been convicted of murder. He didn't commit. He was in prison for life. He spent 23 years, and he kept saying he was innocent. Well, I conducted a brain fingerprinting test. I found that the record in his brain didn't match the crime, did match his alibi. So he ultimately he was free. So the truth will set you free. So brain fingerprinting is something that I invented that allows us to discover what the truth is. And that can help us to catch the bad guys and free innocent people who are falsely convicted, falsely imprisoned.
Well, first of all, Larry, you and your team, I want to thank you guys for the work that you guys do. When we talk about the front line, you guys are on the front line, catching the bad guys and also proving the innocence of the wrongly accused. But the point for the regular audience that I want to talk to is the fact that what you're trying to tell us is that there is empirical evidence that shows that when we are true to ourselves and we just be ourselves, it creates signatures and electromagnetic signatures in our bodies that really shows proof whether we're being truthful or not, right?
Right. And there's another way that I can tell you and your viewers here that you can take advantage of this murmur phenomenon.
Yeah.
And that has to do with how the brain learns and how the brain functions. So you're 2 years old, you're crawling around on the kitchen floor. You touch the floor, you touch the wall, you touch the table leg, you touch your diaper. None of that's particularly interesting. You don't pick up anything new from that. But then you say you touch the hot stove. Now, when you touch the hot stove, you have a murmur experience. You have a aha experience. Oh boy, okay, now there's new information. There's something important happening here that I need to take account of. So what happens then is when you have this murmur moment, your brain is opened up for reprogramming. You're taking in new information. Okay, there's something important here that I've got to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's fast forward to present day in one's life, and you come across a situation that's triggering for you for one reason or another. Somebody says something that you find very upsetting. Somebody does something you find exasperating or angering or whatever. It gets to you. You're triggered by it. Now, what many people do is they either react and outwardly or inwardly. React outwardly, you shoot the messenger, yell at that person, get angry, but try to make sure, punish them so they won't do that again. Mm-hmm. Or people internalize and they say, "Oh gosh, I really am stupid or useless or whatever it is." Mm-hmm. So you can take advantage of how the brain works. When you get into a situation where you're triggered by something, instead of reacting to it, instead of taking it out on shooting the messenger or shooting yourself in the foot, mm-hmm. you can tune into who you truly are. And let me talk for a minute about who you truly are. Mm-hmm. We carry around in our life an inner blueprint that says if something attacks us or appears to be attacking us, it usually is some kind of a hit either on your value or your power or your safety. Mm-hmm. So we carry around within ourselves an inner blueprint that says we're only 75% valuable and 54% safe, mm-hmm. and 82% powerful, whatever it is. So what happens is for a long time throughout our lives, we've had that inner vision, that blueprint that we're not completely safe and powerful and valuable. So we create that resonance in the conscious unified field. And then all kinds of things happen in our life to prove that we're right, that I'm not 100% valuable, safe, and powerful. Right. So the real you is this conscious unified field that's unbounded, that's 100% safe, 100% powerful, and 100% valuable. So what you can do when you have one of these murmur moments, instead of reacting to it, instead of being triggered to go into anger or fear or depression or whatever it is, remember that your brain is now opened up for reprogramming and tune in to the experience within yourself, the level that you're 100% safe, 100% valuable, 100% powerful. Tune into who you really are and start to radiate that. You create a shift. We call it a transmutation, a shift in your experience of yourself, a shift in who you are, a shift in your being. And you start to be more in tune with your true blueprint, which is that you're 100% safe, powerful, and valuable. And that's the life you start to create more and more. So the take-home message, if you don't remember anything else from this hour, take-home message, when something really triggers you, use this, I call it transmutation trigger. Yes. Recognize, oh, okay, my brain's open for reprogram. I can tune into who I really am, 100% safe, 100% valuable, 100% powerful. And it completely turns these negative experiences upside down. Because now when somebody comes along and says something that otherwise would be triggering to you, you're going to start to have a little smile at the corners of your mouth because you're going to think, oh, great. This is an opportunity for transmutation, an opportunity to create a shift in my being, a shift in what I'm creating in my life.
Absolutely beautiful. Let me ask you one question. Does it have to just take only negative feedback to create that window of transmutation or transmutation?
Brilliant question. And no, it doesn't. In fact, a lot of the murmur moments we get, or many of them anyway, are some negative experience, but it can be a positive experience because, well, say, okay, first time you touch a hot stove, you're going to have a negative murmur experience. Okay, that's going to get your attention. Oh, all right. First time you touch somebody of the opposite sex that you're very attracted to and that you really care about in a loving way, well, that's going to be a murmur experience
That
too.
makes sense,
Get
right?
even more intense one. And that opens up your brain for reprogramming so you can tune into who you really are and tune in energetically to all of the delightful things that are going on and create those patterns in your brain. And the brain tends to continue the patterns that you implement, and the
Mm.
tracks that you don't use tend to fall away, so that you can transmute the functioning of your brain.
Absolutely beautiful. So I know my questions are going back and forth, but I wanted to start with the trunk of the tree, the root of the tree, which is us. We are the
All right.
root because
Yes.
our consciousness is what creates the reality or the experience or attracting it
Right.
to us. So, you know, we just went over the fact that our brain has the ability to create into reality what we are thinking. Well, let's go back to the unified field and really
Okay.
break it down a little bit more for our audience. You talked about the string theory and the fact that everything vibrates, but let's go back even further and talk about the fact that you said the unified field is everywhere in time and
Yep.
space.
Yep. Okay. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's say we have a light bulb here today. Let's say it's a regular old-fashioned incandescent light bulb. So we heat up the filament. It sets the electromagnetic field into particular vibrations at a particular frequency. We get light out of the light bulb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so there's a unified field being excited into waves. Now, let's say some strange alien being takes that same light bulb or another one like it on the other side of the galaxy, and he runs that electricity through it. His filament heats up. It's going to excite the same electromagnetic field. The same phenomenon is going to take place. So the laws of nature, the potential for creating that vibration was there everywhere. The unified field moved into that because we created the right situation. So that's true with respect not just to photons, but with respect to all of the forms and phenomena that make up creation. They are simply like waves on the surface of the conscious unified field. And since that conscious unified field is who you really are that unbounded field that arises into the waves, the
Mm-hmm.
particle wave phenomena that make up creation. That's why you can create your life however you desire to create it.
Beautiful. I used to when my second born was young, he would come back from school with a rock, and he would say, "This rock is saying this and this," and he was
Uh-huh.
telling me that the rock was telling him stuff. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, "Oh, how cute." And I kept every single rock and I saved them for him. I think I have a big bucket still of the rocks. And
Uh-huh.
now what I do is I paint over those rocks and I return them back to nature. But
Mm-hmm.
it's just beautiful that he could feel the vibration in those
Mm-hmm.
rocks and be able to understand and connect to that level of understanding in the universe. It's just beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
we say that our kids are the innocence that they pick up more than we do because we're still our conscious mind has kind of put some frames around our level of awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about awareness and perception with
Okay.
understanding this and creating the miracle that we need to create in our lives.
All right. Well, once again, as you've started to say, there are different levels of awareness,
Yeah.
and there are different levels of subtlety of awareness. For example, when some people will come into the room, a person enters the room, before they've even said anything, before they've even done anything, you feel some harmony, you feel some calm, you feel some love, you feel some vibratory influence of peace, harmony, love, fulfillment. You just feel great around that person. Now, somebody else may enter the room, and you have a very different experience. You
Right.
feel uncomfortable before they've even said anything or done anything. Well, so we pick up on subtle vibratory influences like resonant frequencies. Like, again, you pluck the guitar string, it sets up a resonant frequency. Well, the whole world is resonant frequencies. So we pick up on subtle resonant frequencies from the environment and from other people. We're not only interacting with other people in the way we speak, the overt actions that we do, we're creating a resonance on the level of our consciousness that influences and is influenced by the other people. So the more you can tune into yourself, the more you can tune into those quieter levels of your intuition, the more you're able to intuitively sense what's going on energetically with other people. Sometimes you can have a feeling, you can have an intuitive feeling about someone, and that'll turn out to give you really good information, either positive or negative, or maybe neutral, just information, because you're picking up on something that's subtle, that's deeper than the surface.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think you talked about that before. There are two levels of creating. You've given us some steps as to how to get to this state of thinking, and you said there's a superposition phase and a transmutation phase. Can you talk about those two phases? And then you said the first thing, it has to be in. You have to do it in silence.
Right. Okay.
So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I could. Uh, I've used the word transmutation, and I haven't actually yet today really explained what that's about. There's a lot of talk today about transformation. Transformation means changing the form of something. Transform. For example, let's say you have a statue that's made out of lead, and you can change the form of it. You can make a different shaped statue, but it's still made out of lead. Now, transmutation, traditionally in alchemy, they were attempting to use transmutation to change base metals, other metals, into gold. So instead of changing the form of something, transmutation would mean you actually change the thing itself. You change the substance, what was the basis of it, the essence of it. Now, in human life, what we mean by transmutation is this. You can transform your thinking, you can transform your emotions, your beliefs, your self-image, your attitudes. But what transmutation has to do with is a fundamental shift in who's creating. It's a shift on the level of your being. It's who's creating those attitudes, who's creating those emotions, who's creating those thoughts. So transmutation is a more profound, subtler phenomenon than transformation. And there are a lot of really great techniques and methods for transformation, but transmutation is getting to a more fundamental level of your life. And if you want me to talk about those specific terms,
Well,
superposition and transmutation.
I think one of my confusion in reading the book for me was, you said who is, in your definition of transmutation, who is doing it? Are you
Yes.
saying we are now being the observer and we are observing us doing it, or is it the divine, or whoever we want to call God, Krishna? Who?
Well, here's the thing. It depends on what level you're experiencing yourself, because
Mm,
that's really a profound question. Because you have the small s self. In other words, there are different things about of us that are individual, not necessarily good or bad, but just different. I mean, I like, you can maybe see behind me, I'm on a boat here. I
yeah.
like living on a boat. Some people don't like boats. You really love horses. Some people are a lot less happy being around horses than you are. So there are individual qualities that we have, that small s self. But there also is the large S self. And at the level of the large S self, who you are is that unbounded field of pure consciousness, that
Mm,
infinite reservoir of consciousness that lies within. And you experience that on the level of quietness. You don't experience that on the level of forcing or action or anything outside yourself. So tuning into the sense of who you are, tuning into that inner being of who you are, attunes your awareness and gets your brain used to experiencing
Mm,
the more expanded you. So you talked about the divine. Well, the divine is within all of us at that very, very quiet level. When you tune into that level of yourself, it's the most powerful level of yourself.
right, right. That's beautiful. I understand that now. You know, even when you talk about tuning into yourself, you're tuning into your true self because we are all vibrating at a vibration. So when we ourselves slow down our thoughts and our attention and focus on ourselves, we tune into our own vibration.
Yes. Yeah.
And that same vibration that's within us is out there in the unified
Yeah.
field.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, you enliven the unified field a vibration that's in tune with you. And if
Hmm.
it's a very quiet level, you're very close to the unified field. You're at a subtle level of your intuition. That's going to be in tune with nature. You start that vibratory influence, and then you find that that's showing up throughout your life. And all these things come to you in ways you never could have imagined because the conscious unified field takes everything into account all at once, not
Yeah.
just the limited things we can see and manipulate.
Well, that's beautiful. So you talked about the laws of nature. How many laws are there that we should become more aware of?
Well, as a scientist, I can
Oh,
see uh, we start to explore and codify and test the laws of nature, and I mean, zillions. I mean, there are an unlimited number of laws of nature. However, the advantage on the experiential level, you can tune in with all the laws of nature by tuning into the conscious unified field within yourself.
mm,
Now, one of the fundamental laws of nature is the law of resonance. In other words, we create what we resonate with. Again, you pluck a guitar string, it vibrates at a particular resonant frequency, and that's going to pick up on other instruments with the same resonant frequency, and the environment will pick up on that and start to move in that way too. So when you create on the level of your life a vibratory influence, a
mm.
vision, uh, a hologram that is something that is desirable to you and that's in tune with you and in tune with nature, you're creating that in the universe, and that's how we create our lives.
You know, there was an experience years ago with I think it was in Chicago where several monks were brought in to test on their meditation power of creating a lower crime rate. Do you remember that one?
Well, actually, with transcendental meditation, they had a number of experiments like that,
Right.
where they got people together practicing transcendental meditation, attuning themselves to this conscious unified field, and they predicted in advance. And there was one is done in Washington D.C. where they had about 1,000 of those transcendental meditation experts get together, and they predicted in advance with the police
Yeah.
and the various authorities is that the crime rate's going to go down. Why? Because we all contribute to the
Yeah.
collective consciousness. If there's stress in collective consciousness,
Yeah.
if people are suffering, if people are stressed, they're going to take that out on each other in a family or a city or a nation or a world, and crime is going to go up. If you can refine the level of experience of the collective consciousness of an area,
Yeah.
then what will happen is that people are going to be experiencing a more harmony and fulfillment in their lives, and the crime rate's going to go down. And the in fact showed that with transcendental meditation, that actually did take place. And they one of the interesting things about that research was that they before they got this group of people together practicing transcendental meditation, they filed the predicted results with the authorities. So they couldn't say if it happened later. They couldn't say, well, you just made that up, because they
Hmm.
predicted it in advance.
Oh wow. So not only we as an individual can create our own individual miracles. Once we connect to unified field, we are affecting everyone in the universe, in the on Earth. and
Yes.
and probably the universe if there's other living beings out there, because our energies are transmuted through into the field, which is just
Yep.
beautiful. That's a level of consciousness that everyone should become aware of. Um,
Yes.
in the book, you mentioned about blind spot, though, and I think it's on the same level as perception. I'm sorry, or mindset or
Yep.
paradigm. These different words that are being used, right? So,
Right.
am I on the right track with that? Mentioning
Yes.
blind spot and how we are thinking in order for us to create, we have to think. But if we're thinking with a blind spot of our intelligence, then we can't create. Can you just expand a little bit more on that? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah. You've got the idea there. Okay. Well, one of the things I showed, there's a little exercise in the book where I showed that we actually have a blind spot in our visual field,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one in each eye, and it's pretty big. I mean, it's a blind spot that's big enough that somebody's about 15 feet away, their face could be in that spot. So we
Mm-hmm.
go around for 20, 30, 50, 100 years. We don't see a hole in our physical in our visual field. But there are little experiments you can do where you cover one eye and you look at something with the other eye, where you find there actually is a blind spot. But what happens is that our brain fills in to that blind spot whatever is around it, so we don't see it as a whole in our awareness,
Mm-hmm.
in our visual what we're seeing. Now that same principle applies to our understanding of the way the universe works. We can have blind spots, things we just don't see because we're stuck in a paradigm. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example from the history of science, which everyone knows about. For 1,000 years, even the smartest people in the world, they were asking the question is, how do all the heavenly bodies move around the earth? It's obvious they do. You see the sun come up in the morning, you see the moon move around, you see the planets, they move in sort of a much more complicated way. All the stars move around, everything moves around the earth. So as soon as you have asked that question, how do all the heavenly bodies move around the earth? You are now blind to the actual true answer because it's the
Mm-hmm.
wrong question. Because the real question is, how do all of the heavenly bodies, including the earth, move in
Right.
relation to each other? So that paradigm, the geocentric, earth-centric paradigm, had a blind spot. And that blind spot really contained the whole way the universe functions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the blind spot in a lot of people's understanding about human life is consciousness. They see all these concrete things and they have the thoughts and the feelings and the ideas and the physical body and all this stuff out there in the universe and all the things you can physically touch. But what is there, it's not obvious, is that consciousness has got to be there in order for you to have all those experiences. And when you can enliven more consciousness in your life, you're more fully conscious. Everything about your experience is enhanced. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a blind spot in a lot of people's way of thinking. And it was a blind spot in physics until quantum mechanics and relativity came along. In the Newtonian paradigm, which lasted for, say, 400 years, everybody thought the earth just worked, the world, the universe just worked like clockwork. And we came
Right.
along and we just come along and look at it. Well, it turns out that consciousness plays a role in creating what we experience. It's not just that the universe works like clockwork and we come along and look at it. And that's the double slit experiment was one of the first scientific proofs that that was the case. How we observe something influences what we actually find is out there.
Yeah.
And that blind spot has now allowed us, when we start to look into that, to realize if we develop our consciousness, we can develop everything in life in a positive way.
Larry, your book reminded me of a book that was written, I think it was back in the 40s. I might be wrong, but it was the cyber. I think it was cyber.
Psycho-cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz.
Yeah, and in it he talks about a field, and he talks about the fact that we can create what we want based on our inner connection to ourselves. And so let's go back to your book, Bill. You've been able to talk, create certain methods. You call it, I think you call it the transmutation trigger method. Can you tell us what it is and how you're able to present that to the world through workshops, or is it via live? Just tell us a little bit more about that, because we have about 10 more minutes, and what's fit in is just to finish with the fact that you have a solution, that one method, one of many that's
Yeah.
out there, but is very scientifically proven. So I would probably drift more towards doing your method than any other methods because it's proven, right?
Yes.
So can you just expand a little bit more on that, please?
Sure. Sure. Well, when we first did the research that I talked about, the physics research, this was 20 years ago. And we showed, okay, miracles are possible. We can create a shift in the probability distribution of quantum mechanical events. Okay, fine. But what does that have to do with my life? The question I always got was, okay, so what? I'm convinced that's great. Consciousness plays a major role in the universe. So what? What can that do for me? So I spent the last 20 years developing specific techniques to apply your consciousness, apply your brain, apply a more harmonious functioning of your brain, more powerful functioning of your brain, to create miracles in your life, to create that, to be able to create in your life that inner vision that you have. I mean, the title of the book, Science of Creating Miracles, Neuroscience, Quantum Physics, and Living the Life of Your Dreams. It's about how to apply neuroscience and quantum physics in your life to create the life that you aspire to. And I spoke a little bit earlier on about, and there are a lot of different techniques. Some of them are in the book, and I have workshops. I have a number of workshops. The next one is starting on April 18th for 10 sessions once a week, Monday evenings. It's I believe it's at 5:00 p.m. on Pacific time. And in those workshops, I train people to practice these techniques, to tune into your awareness, to transmute your experience of life so that you're able to use your consciousness to create the things you envision in your life, to create miracles. And what happens is that people in these workshops create miracles in their lives. They create improbable things that otherwise wouldn't happen.
I think Maxwell Malt says, when you really go inward, to create what you want, because you're creating an holographic, and you mentioned in your book as well, when we go inward and we create the image of what we want, and we are creating an holographic image of the existence of it, um, what the universe does, or the law of nature does, it turns, and I like to use my phrase because of my business name, it turns like a compass towards you and start bringing to you the answer that's already out there in the field. So the answer
Mm-hmm.
is already there. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that you are now discovering it because the laws of nature is tuning it towards you and bringing it towards you.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
So how do we get to this state of, can you demonstrate or make us, tell us a little bit about the steps? I know you do the workshops, and the workshops are more detailed and more precise, but is there a way you can recommend to the audience to start without the workshops?
Well, sure. I mean, I would certainly recommend reading the book because I go into quite
Yes.
a lot of detail, a bunch of different techniques in the book. Uh, One of the things I talked about a little while ago was, I think, a useful take-home message with respect to transmutation trigger. And that is, remember, we talked about a little earlier on, when you have one of these murmur moments, when something gets your attention, when you have an aha experience, might be a positive one, sometimes it's a negative one, instead of reacting to that, it's opened your brain up for reprogramming, like touching the hot stove. Aha, okay, now there's something I have to learn here. When
Yeah.
somebody says or does something that triggers you, instead of shooting the messenger or shooting yourself, the thing to do is tune into, oh, okay, what does the real Aletha feel
Mm,
like? The 100% valuable, 100% safe, 100% powerful level of my life. What does it feel like to be me? Tune into your own inner resonance, and then you can use that experience to transmute your experience of life. So
mm,
instead, when these things come along that trigger you, instead of thinking, oh my God, this is terrible, this has happened, I'm all upset, you can use that as a transmutation trigger to trigger to tune you into transmutation, to enlivening your real being. You're 100% safe, 100% powerful, 100% valuable. And I'm not talking about just thinking those thoughts. I'm talking about tuning into that level of your life where you feel that, where you experience them. And that's a take-home message that you can take advantage of. All of those experiences you used to try to avoid, where someone would say or do something that would trigger you, you now, when that happens, you can say, well, hey, boy, this is great. This is an opportunity. I can tune into the real me. I can start to enliven the true blueprint, 100% safe, 100% powerful, 100% valuable.
Yeah.
And I would also suggest people can learn a lot of this stuff, and there are a bunch of videos and stuff about this on my website, which is drlarryfarwell.com, drlarryfarwell.com. And you'll be able to see videos there where I talk about some of the things we've just mentioned here. And there's an opportunity to get to the workshops there.
Yeah.
And I would also, as I mentioned, recommend read the book. There are a whole lot of stuff in there
Yes.
about what
I
we're
I
talking about.
I read the book from corner to corner, and I actually am going back to it and now just highlighting a lot of stuff. Um,
Mhm.
because there's so many things that I've been practicing naturally, intuitively,
Yeah.
and also collecting from coursework, and it feels good to have a book in my hand that shows the evidence that of what I've been doing really, really does happen. And we can create miracles in our lives by the way we think and feel based on being true to our true self and living our true self, being authentic and really resonating from that, and being conscious of it, being conscious that we are in tune with it. Because
Yeah.
often work in life just makes us forget about tuning into ourselves. And so, if anything that you guys hear from me or Dr. Farwell is just really know that when we tune into ourselves, we can create the miracles that we want. We can have the abundance that we want because, and I want to go back to a phrase that you said. I can't see anything without my glasses, Larry. So
Go
you said
ahead.
something really good in the book that I absolutely love. Begin by becoming aware of the highest essence of yourself. So your highest self, which we
Mhm.
when we do transcendental meditation, we encourage people to find their highest self. Who are you? Who is your best self? Or what is your best self? But you said
Mhm.
then recognize the reality. I am infinitely valuable, powerful, and safe. I like myself. I love myself. Everything I think, do, and say is in accord with my highest nature, with the enlightened being I truly am. And that's on page 147, y'all. So
Yeah.
go get the book because it's just packed with not only science, but it also explains things in layman's terms for each and every one of us. And there you have a beautiful section that talks about how the brain is doing all this, and
Mhm.
that in itself is powerful for me because I'm doing my research on equine therapy, and a
Mhm.
section of my my dissertation is going to talk about how the brain works. So I'm definitely with honor, with your permission, I will talk to you later about it, but I definitely be
Okay.
referencing your book into my research. So really crazy question, Larry. How does intuition show up for you?
Okay. Well, first of all, intuition shows up for me the way it shows up for everybody in the sense is this: there's a surface level thinking in the mind. There's your intellect, there are your emotions. They're pretty loud.
Mm,
Whereas the conscious unified field is silent. It's very quiet. So the
mm,
way you tune into your intuition is not by forcing and trying harder. It's by letting go. It's by
mm,
letting the mind quiet down. It's on the level of silence, level of quietness. The the intellect screams, the emotions yell, and the intuition whispers. So tuning into your intuition is a matter of allowing your mind to settle down to a state of quietness. And
mm,
then you're at the most powerful level, closest to the conscious unified field, where you can tune into reality at a subtle level about yourself or about anything.
mm. in Portugal we do the finger clicking, and in Jamaica, I guess when I grew up, we say that means you just really touch, you're hitting it. Or in Africa we say ashe. We totally, with our entire being, completely are there with you and understand you in all that you're saying. So Dr. Farwell, thank you so much for the work that you do and continue to do for us and humankind, and as well as for the protection and safety of our lives. So without further ado, I just want to say to the audience, he has the last say, but I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here for this hour. What would you like to tell the audience, if anything else, on top of all that you've said?
All right. Well, I'd say enjoy your life. Life is here to enjoy. The natural state of life is to be happy and fulfilled. Tune
Mm,
into who you really are and express that fully in your life, and you'll have a wonderful, delightful life, and create miracles. You can create
yeah.
miracles from within yourself on the quiet level of tuning into who you are and then setting up that resonance, and you'll find that's what your life is going to experience.
Beautiful. If you guys enjoyed what you just heard, please give me some feedback. And Dr. Farrell is, he can be found at drlarryfarrell.com. All his workshops and his the materials that he has, resources that he's provided us through this interview, and more are on that website. So, without further ado, guys, you have a beautiful, beautiful week. Thank you. Bye bye.